Of all the battles that the Newfoundland Regiment fought during the First World War, none was as devastating or as defining as the Battle of the Somme. The regiment's tragic advance at Beaumont-Hamel on the morning of July 1st, 1916, became an enduring symbol of its valor and of its terrible wartime sacrifices. The events of that day were forever seared into the cultural memory of the Newfoundland and Labrador people. At the start of 1916, Allied forces were in trouble. The Gallipoli campaign had been a failure. The Eastern Front was in disarray, and the Western Front was locked in a stalemate. Germany had marched through Belgium and into northern France, where its army was securely entrenched near the river Somme. British and French forces desperately needed a success. Commanders spent the winter planning a major offensive to regain control of the Somme. They deployed more than 500,000 troops to the region. Among them was the Newfoundland Regiment. It arrived at northern France in March 1916. The regiment spent the next 3 months training, digging trenches, and preparing for combat. The battleground was a 34-kilometer ribbon of land near the river Somme. Allied trenches stretched along one side and the Germans along the other. In between lay no man's land. As the troops readied for combat, their thoughts turned to home. Censorship laws prohibited them from saying anything about the upcoming battle, but that didn't stop Lieutenant Owen Steele from sending a brief letter of assurance to his family in St. John's. He was serving in the regiment with his brother, Jim.
June 25th, 1916. This letter will be very short, for we have been up to our eyes in work for the past fortnight, and will be for some time to come, the reason for which I cannot give you even an inkling. But you will have heard all before this reaches you. I'm afraid that quite a long time will elapse before you get another letter from us, but you need not worry, for we shall be all right. Jim and I are both okay and in the best of spirits, and I hope it will not be long before we shall be able to write you a decent letter each. I'm hoping that there will be a possibility of our spending Christmas with you all this year. Would not that be grand?
The offensive began on July 1st, 1916. Hundreds of thousands of Allied troops were spread along the front line. The Newfoundland Regiment was fighting with the 29th Division of the British Army. Their assignment was to seize control of the German trenches near the village of Beaumont-Hamel. Allied forces bombarded the Germans with artillery at 6 a.m. The attack lasted for about an hour. Then, at 7:20, they detonated more than 18,000 kilograms of explosives under Hawthorne Ridge. The ridge was an important German stronghold about 700 meters to the west of Beaumont-Hamel. The blast turned the area into a giant crater, 40 meters wide and 18 meters deep. The timing of the explosion turned out to be a terrible mistake. The original plan called for it to go off 2 minutes before Allied troops left their trenches. But later revisions put it 10 minutes before the land attack. This destroyed any element of surprise. The explosion alerted Germans that an attack was imminent, and the 10-minute delay gave them just enough time to strengthen their defenses and ready their machine guns. As the first wave of Allied troops left their trenches at 7:30, they were greeted by a devastating barrage of enemy artillery and machine gun fire. It was far stronger than anyone had anticipated. Most men were killed or wounded within minutes. A second wave of troops left their trenches soon after. They met with the same fate. The Newfoundland Regiment was part of the third wave of attack. The men went over the top at 9:15 a.m. First, they had to move through the British barbed wire on their side of the battlefield. Then, they had to cross the 250-meter-wide expanse of no man's land. But the battlefield sloped downwards, towards the enemy trenches. This put troops in full view of the Germans. Enemy fire hailed down onto them. Most of the men were shot dead or wounded before they even reached no man's land. Private James McGraw was one of the few who survived the attack.
The machine gun fire was something terrible. The Germans actually mowed us down like sheep. I managed to get to the barbed wire, where I got the first shot. Then went to jump into their trench when I got the second in the leg. I lay in no man's land for 15 hours and then crawled the distance of 1.25 miles. They fired on me again, this time fetching me in the left leg, and so I waited for another hour and moved again. As I was nearing our own trench, they again fetched me, this time around the hip as I crawled on. I managed to get to our own line, which I saw was evacuated as the artillery was playing heavily on their trenches. They retaliated and kept me in a hole for another hour. I was then rescued by Captain Windler, who took me on his back to the dressing station, a distance of 2 miles. Well, thank God my wounds are all flesh wounds and won't take long to heal up.
Enemy fire was so overwhelming that Allied forces had to wait until nightfall to retrieve their dead and wounded. The attack had been a devastating failure. In a single morning, almost 20,000 British troops had died, and the Newfoundland Regiment was almost wiped out. Only 68 men answered roll call later that day. 710 had been killed or wounded. When news reached Newfoundland and Labrador, it plunged the Dominion into widespread mourning. Casualty lists appeared in local newspapers. Information came in slowly from the front lines, and it was incomplete. Many families had to endure a few tortured weeks of wondering whether their loved ones were alive or dead.
July 18th, 1916. My dear Willie, I'm writing you these few lines to let you know that I got your letter of the 18th of June in due time, and we were very glad to hear you were in good health when you wrote, and I hope this will find the same now. I see by it that you were in the trenches when you wrote, and I hope you came out all right. But I see by the papers that you fought a big battle since then, and I hope to God you came through it all right, for it must have been an awful time, and if you got through, you must be one of the very lucky ones. I only hope you did, and if you did, we must thank God for it. If I can judge from the number of killed and wounded on the casualties list that have come in, they number up to now over 500 and are still coming in. But you are not among the number that have come in so far, and I hope and pray to God you won't be on it. From your ever-loving Grandpa, Warren.
The envelope was later returned, unopened, with the word dead written across it in red ink. William Knight was one of the many men killed at Beaumont-Hamel on July 1st, 1916. He was 23 years old. The following days brought more death. Lieutenant Steele had survived Beaumont-Hamel, only to be hit by a German shell on July 7th while he was standing just outside D Company's lodgings. He died one day later. His brother Jim survived the war and returned home. Newfoundland and Labrador entered a period of mourning after Beaumont-Hamel. British officers sent letters of condolence to the many families who had lost sons, husbands, fathers, brothers. And Allied leaders publicly praised the Newfoundland Regiment. Compliments also came from Sir A. Hunter Weston. He was the general commanding officer of the 29th Division of the British Army. "Newfoundlanders, I salute you individually," he said. "You have done better than the best." Beaumont-Hamel had far-reaching effects in Newfoundland and Labrador. The first Memorial Day ceremony took place in downtown St. John's 1 year later. In the 1920s, the government bought the ground over which the Newfoundland Regiment fought. The memorial park it established there became a place of pilgrimage for many people. Today, July 1st remains an official day of remembrance in Newfoundland and Labrador. Every year, people gather at the National War Memorial in downtown St. John's and at other locations across the province. They honor the soldiers who fought at Beaumont-Hamel, as well as the many other men and women who have served in other forces and other wars.